Hello, welcome to another episode of the Meter Cute interviews here on Meter and Mayhem. Today I'll be sitting down with Wendy McVicker, who was the Poet Laureate of Athens, Ohio from 2020 to 2022. She's also been a longtime Ohio Arts Council teaching artist. Her work has appeared in numerous print and online journals, including Pine Mountain Sand and Gravel, Sheila Nagig Online, and Gyroscope Review. Her chapbooks include The Dancer's Notes from Finishing Line Press and Zero, a Door from the Orchard Street Press. Recently, she co-authored Stronger When We Touch with Kathy Coltis Lintus, also from the Orchard Street Press. She's collaborated with musicians, dancers, and visual artists, such as putting together a collection with the artist John McVicker called Sliced Dark, which has been part of Athens County Library's Stories in the Park series. Additionally, she performs whenever she gets the chance with instrumentalist Emily Prince under the name Another Language Altogether. That all sounds very intriguing. Are you ready? Okay, then sit back, relax, and get ready to fall in love.
Hi there. This is Wendy McVicker coming to you from Athens, Ohio, and very grateful to be asked by Jen Schomburg-Kenke to do this reading and have this conversation. So I thought, thinking about doing it, I thought that I would pull on a thread that I've been following for a lot of years and invite you to follow it along with me through these poems, which are moments on the thread, knots or beads. Let's stop there. So I'm going to start with a poem in my chapbook, The Dancer's Notes, and the title is a quotation from Robert Wilson, who said this about his mother. She sat beautifully in chairs. And as soon as I heard that, I thought, oh boy, that is quite an interesting thing to say about your mother. And I could say that about my mother too. She sat beautifully in chairs, and above her, the dusk blue sky filled with bats circling the waning moon. She, a waning moon, lucent profile, a cameo, an ivory slice dimensionless and pale. She accepts our homage, torn petals fluttering at her feet, her delicate ankles locked against our touch. To herself, she smiles a secret smile, and we orbit about her, beating our leathern wings. So, that mother thing that I didn't think I was allowed to write about for a long time. And I had to do it slant for a long time. So, in a more recent chapbook called Zero, a Door, I have this poem. Boy, it's hot in here and nobody's drunk. Boy, it's hot in here, they said to each other, sitting around the table in winter coats, candlelight flickering on the cards. No electric, no gas. That fickle light shimmied in the depths of their whiskey glasses, skittered across the scarred tabletop. They shrugged smoke around their shoulders, splashed ashes like fallen petals. We learned to stop shivering. We learned to not hear what our cold hands were telling us, our empty bellies. We learned to laugh at their jokes and scatter when voices rose and tears fell. We learned to be numb. I was curious that these petals kept appearing in these poems I wanted to read to you. This is called Proof, and it's actually from a photograph, an old photograph. I'm just outside the front door. You can barely see me. I am a shadow of smoke or fog or a flaw on the film, a trick of light. The others stand on the porch. You can feel their weight bowing the boards. You see the way they sink and settle. I was already drifting like loose petals, forgotten or forgetting. No one called out. I slipped past, got away. Here's proof. So, moving right along, the book we're celebrating this year is called Stronger When We Touch. And as you can see, it is a collaborative collection uh, I, with Kathy Koltais Lentas, also a Southeast Ohio poet. Um, she and I took an epistolary poetry class with Pauletta Hansel in that dark winter of 2021. And we were paired up to write epistolary poems to each other and letter poems. And we we got so into it we didn't want to stop. We weren't planning to put together a book, but we kept writing to each other at a more measured pace than in the class. And after a few months we said, gee, we might have a collection here. And thankfully, um, Jack Christofko of the Orchard Street Press agreed. So these themes continue in this collection, but I think I want to read the poem that opens it first. This was kind of an extra. Mostly Kathy and I were writing back and forth, letter for letter, but every once in a while I could not resist writing something extra. And this I wrote for Kathy. It's called My Friend the Lighthouse Keeper. And this lighthouses loomed tall and large in our correspondence, no doubt in part because we were isolated during that time of the pandemic. And also we've both spent time at the seashore, on our own and together. And so it felt very much like we were flashing beacons for each other in the darkness of the pandemic. So this is My Friend the Lighthouse Keeper. She keeps the lantern burning all through the long nights of our wanderings. She is not afraid of storms. She is not afraid of rocks. Her steady beam sweeps the coast, returns again and again. Once I climbed the winding stairs and looked through her eyes. I saw that the ocean was forever and asked, are we? The answer rushed in on a roaring, tumbling tide. Of course. And I have to say, it's a very fun thing and a wonderful thing for a friendship to do a project like this together. I suppose it could kill a friendship in some circumstances, but in this one, it has strengthened and deepened the friendship. So I think I'll read you a poem called Reckonings, part because it continues pulling on that thread. Reckonings, the week Dante Wright was killed. This week, tulips opened their mouths and sang color into the world. It's harder to dive into that old stuff when the sun shines. The box of photos under my bed, memories of my mother smiling as shadows gathered around her. You and I began this journey in February, locked down by ice and snow. February, when my mother's father died on the 14th, a bleeding arrow through the heart of the month of our family. I was 11. I still hear her wail, Daddy's gone. Suicide, some whispered later. She passed her February depression on to me, and I wore it until I could shake it loose. He draped her, his only child, with gems, tiny versions of the jewelry he gave her mother. What did this mean? Did she sleep on that snowy sun porch to escape a touch that burned? Later, she had to keep setting fires, dousing them with gin. She played at suicide herself. Do you see how I put that? I still see her playing games, playing us all for fools. She almost killed us once. Gas tightening my lungs, the house dark, my father pounding on her locked bedroom door. I want to think that spiraling back to this story takes me closer to the light each time. I suppose it's true that the past lives on unto the seventh generation. Isn't that what they say? Chickens always come home to roost. Is it any wonder we're still reckoning with slavery today? So that brings us to the present day. And um, I'm happy to be able to say that Shilling a Gig Editions is going to put out a chapbook. Only today we came up with a title, which is Alone in the Burning, and it is all about these poems started a number of years ago, and it's all focused on early childhood and this trauma. Um, and so I'm going to read you two more poems. One was published in Shilling a Gig Online. It tells this story, and then the other is from the new collection. This is this is the scariest story. She spun in her sequined satin gown to music we could not hear. We tried. We tried to dance to her tune, dizzied as we were by Shalimar and smoke, by her spinning like a record pinned on the spindle. She twirled us round, tiny planets orbiting her sun, craving her light. She spun herself sick, and then she turned on the gas and spun away. And this is called When I Was Alone, from Alone in the Burning. I knew how to hold stillness close to my heart. I knew how to wait, one way to be safe. Running is another, not my way. In the story, the doe broke and ran across the clearing. That's when the gun found her. That's how I learned to be still. That's how I learned to wait. Thank you.
Ah, thank you for that reading, Wendy. Um, I had when I'm listening to people reading, I make little notes about like how I'm gonna, what my jump in point's gonna be.
Sure.
Um, and so I have these notes about how your work really uh has the physicality of the moment. So like we learn to be numb, and you can feel the weight of their weight on the bowing of the boards, the bowing of the, and I was like, yeah, that's what I should talk about when I come back on. But I that last, and of course now I have, right? That's a little bit of rhetorical because I have talked about it by saying it's not what I wanted to talk about. but but that last poem,
Mm,
um I am like I'm not full on crying, but I am definitely teared up from it. Because I understand that feeling so well, and you have rendered it so, because it isn't just about um it isn't just about being still yourself, but it's about learning by seeing other people have the damage done and then going, how do I avoid that damage?
Mm-hmm.
And you get that all in that little, I mean, that's such a tight little poem and you get it all in there. That was amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you. I can't tell you how grateful I am to have this opportunity and have this conversation with you, of all people, because we've been talking together for many, many years. And um, it took such a long time for me to figure out how to approach that material, or if to approach it at all, And I really wanted to be as clear as I could be. And, um, I wanted to approach it with a needle, not a cudgel, if you like. and and so when you say what you said, I feel like, okay, all right, maybe I did that, and I'm so glad.
Yay. Well, I'm gonna ask this question kind of knowing that it segues.
Mhm.
Um, but what is there a particular poet or book that brought this mayhem into your life of being able to write about this stuff, to dive into it?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, there are two. And so the first one, the original one that gave me permission that I felt gave me permission to even write about this stuff was Sharon Olds' poem, I Go Back to May 1937. So that is in her book, The Gold Cell. I love I
Ah.
love waving books around in the camera. And I got this from her when she came to read, I think, at Ohio University. As you know, she does literary festival, or we have this literary festival here at OU. And she must have come twice because I got this book from her. She signed it for Wendy from Sharon Olds, May 2004, Athens. But I only just realized looking at that page that she really wrote May 2004. so so she added an extra zero into the year. And so this to me is not at all surprising because I think of Sharon Olds as being miles ahead and centuries ahead of the rest of us. So there's a poem in this book. I think I was flying west to visit my son or something. And there's a poem in here called I Go Back to May 1937, in which she looks at a photograph of her parents as young, just about to graduate from college, about to get married. And she wants to say to them, don't, 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 don't. And her last line is, I say, do what you are going to do, and I will tell about it. And I get chills. I still get chills when I read that line. And I was sitting on an airplane. I really thought it would fall out of the sky when I read this poem, which I urge you to read. It's tempting to offer to read it for us, but I would
I was going to ask you if you wanted to read it. I would love
I
to
would
hear you read
be
it.
delighted to read it because the chills are even more exciting when you get the build up to that last line. So I go back to May 1937. I see them standing at the formal gates of their colleges. I see my father strolling out under the ochre sandstone arch, the red tiles glinting like bent plates of blood behind his head. I see my mother with a few light books at her hip, standing at the pillar made of tiny bricks with the wrought iron gate still open behind her, its sword tips black in the May air. They are about to graduate. They are about to get married. They are kids. They are dumb. All they know is they are innocent. They would never hurt anybody. I want to go up to them and say, stop, don't do it. She's the wrong woman. He's the wrong man. You are going to do things you cannot imagine you would ever do. You are going to do bad things to children. You are going to suffer in ways you never heard of. You are going to want to die. I want to go up to them there in the late May sunlight and say it. Her hungry, pretty, blank face turning to me, her pitiful, beautiful, untouched body, his arrogant, handsome, blind face turning to me, his pitiful, beautiful, untouched body. But I don't do it. I want to live. I take them up like the male and female paper dolls and bang them together at the hips like chips of flint as if to strike sparks from them. I say, do what you are going to do, and I will tell about it.
Wow.
Isn't that something? So I read that on the airplane. I thought the plane was going to fall out of the sky. I realized that I could write about my family history. And then time went on and time went on. And Sharon Olds came back to Ohio University for another literary festival. And I went up to her and I told her about that. And she said that she always felt when she read that poem in public that lightning would strike the building. And then she read it that night at her reading. It was the most exciting thing. So, if being given permission to enter your own the mine where your load of LODE, of ore lies gleaming, and go get it. If that is mayhem, and I think it is, then that's Sharon Olds who opened that for me. And then in terms of the collection that last poem came from, oddly enough, or maybe not oddly enough, I was several years ago, before pandemic and everything, I was reading Deaf Republic by Ilya Kaminsky, and there was something about the way he told the story he told in that book and the language, the way he used language, that got these little poems started that eventually became this collection. So there you go. That's more mayhem that
Wow.
I love to have in my life.
And I'm looking forward. I mean, I'm excited to read the collaborative effort that's out now, but I feel like I am very much going to be ready to read the one from Sheila and a Gig. Oh wow.
It's it I never imagined in my life that I would be in this place with a new book out and already knowing that there's another one coming. I just never imagined such a thing.
Oh. Um, so this is not what this is just something that's kind of on my mind after hearing you talk about permission to write about our lives. And I'm wondering, you don't have to have an answer for this, but if you have thoughts on it, I'd love to hear it. That there are there are poets who it takes a while for them to write about their childhood experiences or rougher experiences. And then there are poets who are writing about similar kind of experiences, but they're writing about them when they're younger.
Mm.
And I'm just wondering, I don't know what I'm wondering. If I'm wondering if there's a difference in the kind of poems, like if you had written if you had early on in your writing world and your writing life had written about those things, what do you think those poems would have been like for you if you had written early?
That's such an interesting question. Um, I think there are a lot of reasons that I didn't do that earlier. And one of them is the world I grew up in. First of all, it said you don't do not air family linen in public. Okay.
Yes.
so so there's that. Another was I have a poem called House of Poetry. I didn't think I was allowed in the House of Poetry. And so I think that I came up thinking that poets were all men, and they men's concerns. And I heard a number of the women poets that I was very drawn to writing about things that seemed really visceral and real to me. I heard them being disparaged, and that was, that was very unsettling and a little muting, if I may say. And but I think also I needed to do a lot of dealing with this material before I could express it in a way that wasn't just that, to me, actually felt like poetry, as opposed to just a formless wail. I mean, there's nothing wrong with wailing. I have no problem with wailing, but I personally really had to do a lot of work to get to the place where I could articulate what I wanted to articulate about this.
That that makes sense. Oh, what?
There's another piece. I was in my 30s before I had I had the trace memory that I was able to track down to this particular incident. So I was already what some would call a mature person. I mean, and so it wouldn't have occurred to me as a very young person to write about that. It just wouldn't have occurred to me. I wouldn't have thought that my family life was interesting, you know.
I do know. I I wish I didn't know. I wish I didn't understand that, but
Yep,
yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
yep,
Because
yep.
it's just the things that you have had in your life, and this is what life is,
Hmm. Hmm.
you know.
Yes, yes, yeah. So to meet someone as devastatingly visceral and personal as Sharon Olds, who really seems to master her material, um, to think, oh, it's possible to follow in those footsteps. It's possible to go in that direction. I don't make any claims, but I appreciate being shown that there is a path there and that it's okay to walk on it. The gates are open.
Was you mentioned that there are that you had heard a lot of female poets being disparaged. Was Sharon Olds one of those poets, or who were those? Do you remember who those poets were?
Sharon Olds was definitely one of those poets. I once commented to an esteemed professor, who asked, who I liked reading when I mentioned her. I felt very much dismissed, um, in that moment. So isn't that interesting? I mean, I think this happens as one goes along. And also, there was that whole confessional poet label that got put, I mean, not only on women, as we know, but on a lot of women. And it always, early on, I heard it when I was younger as having coming with a tone of lesser than, this is not really that important to be talking about these things. So I just think it's very interesting that we're allowed to talk about the blood of war, but not the blood of menstruation. Um, we are now, happily. I'm very happy to say we are now.
Yeah.
But when I was starting out, that seemed really taboo, and I used to think, really, really, this blood is honored and is okay, and this blood is secret and dark, and we better keep it hidden.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, even there have even been times in sort of my writing life where I have felt that as well.
Yeah.
And you would think, because um I didn't start I didn't believe I could really be a poet until I think I was, when did I was 30 when I quit the one job and I was like, I'm gonna take this job that's very 9 to 5 and be a writer, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so it's only, within the last 20 years, you would think that writing about women's lives would be more accepted, and it is, but then you get in some environments and you get comments like, why is this speaker so crazy? And like you're just expressing like what it's like to be a woman in the world, and you get,
Mhm. Mhm.
so yeah,
It's
I
yeah, I mean, things have opened up a lot, not only for women, but for other people whose voices were tamped down and ignored and dismissed for the longest time. But um, but not all the way. We still got work to do.
yeah. Yep. Yep.
But
um what advice, if you could go back to that earlier Wendy, what advice would you give her?
well, I think I would tell her to trust herself. And yes, first that would be the first thing, to trust yourself, sweetie. It's, follow your leadings. One hears, um, I've heard lots of poets talk about, obsessions, paying attention to the obsessions, to the things that keep coming back, whether it's, incidents or feelings or images or, words that keep coming. Pay attention to those, because that's where your material is. And I think that, um, I would tell her to pay attention to those and honor them, and maybe not spend quite so much time running away from them. On the other hand, I do think that, okay, so that's one thing. I would say, please, um, no need to be afraid of who you are, what you see, and what you have to say. You don't need to be afraid of it. Just let it be. And, um, keep going, and be a little bolder about, um, I can think of several situations where somebody offered something to me and I was too shy to accept it, and I would want her to be just a little bolder about accepting what was being, you know the offerings that came along the way. Um, I think that's what I would say to her. I also recognize that, um, we're all on the path that we're on, and so I had to go through that, maybe. But but yes, I think that's what I would say.
Do you think that she would have any advice to send back your way?
That is a
She got in
really
her time machine and she shows up in 2024.
right. um I don't know. Yeah, we mentioned this before we started recording. Like, would I listen to her? Would I think she had anything to say that um I don't know that I can picture that younger self offering advice. I think that younger self would say, "Oh my gosh, I feel so heartened that that all of that scribbling around in the spaces around all the other things, led to this." That's all I can think that she would say. But I love that question, and I will ponder it further.
So- Well, and if you come up with something, you can always let me know and I can put it down in the comments so that folks can still get a little bit of that wisdom from past Wendy.
Hmm.
Um, Thank you so much for coming and talking to me today, Wendy. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you for having me, Jen. It has been an absolute pleasure for me too. And as I said, we've been talking to each other for many, many years, and um, but with long spaces in between sometimes. And it gives me deep joy to have been able to do this with you today.
What a fun interview that was. I hope that you enjoyed getting to listen in on Wendy and I's chat. Wendy and I have known each other almost 18 years, I think. So a lot of history there. And every time I talk to her, I always think think new things, find out new things. And I got a lot to contemplate after that discussion. I'm sort of obsessed now over the idea that there are a lot of poets who don't write about their childhoods. If they've had rough childhoods, they don't write about it until they're older. And then there's other folks who write about it kind of right out of the gate. It's some of the first stuff that they start writing about. And I'm curious about what those differences are. And if I were an academic, I would probably start taking notes and read a bunch of people's stuff, start looking for patterns, come up with a theory of some kind, write myself a little scholarly paper. Hmm. Thankfully, I'm not an academic anymore. I can just go, huh, interesting thought, and then go have dinner, which is what I'm going to do. Thanks for stopping by.